Greetings, Hacksters! It is Hackster Café Day, my favorite day of the week. We're talking to someone who's doing awesome stuff with hardware, and this week's guest is Nirav Patel, the founder of Framework Laptops, which you've probably heard of. They are the people making the modular laptop that you can upgrade, repair, swap out bits and pieces, make your own bits and pieces, all kinds of stuff like that. Good morning, Nirav. How's it going?
Morning. Great to be here, Alex.
Ah, so excited! Okay. Would you like to tell us, from your perspective, what Framework is?
Sure, yeah. So Framework is fixing consumer electronics, which seems like a bold and crazy mission, but ultimately that's what we're doing. And fundamentally, the problem that we see is that these very advanced, expensive objects, almost like the pinnacle of civilization, we think about like the actual process technology that goes into manufacturing these things, they're designed to be disposable. The assumption is that they're these disposable items that you buy them, you use them for a few years, some part of it wears out or breaks or goes out of date. You stick it in your drawer of shame of dead devices and you pick up another one and you keep using it. And fundamentally, just on the face of it, that's like crazy. Like we take a step back and think about that idea that we're buying these very advanced things only for a battery to wear out or a screen to crack and for it to then go into the landfill and you have to buy another one. And so with Framework, the idea is really let's treat these very advanced, expensive objects as long-lived by default and do that by making them easy to repair and upgrade and customize. So no matter what you need out of your device, whether it's just, a refreshed battery or a fixed screen or, more performance, more storage space or a different port or whatever it is, that we can actually enable that by enabling you to go and swap out that part or module and keep using your product for longer.
And it's really interesting because having these, you've got multiple options here with DIY and pre-built options. It's sort of choose your own amount of customization on here. So you've got, people can go very pre-built, get the entire experience that you've kind of put together for them. But then, of course, they can also get bits kind of a la carte and put them together. That necessarily, of course, creates a trade-off between like the amount of freedom you give the person and the amount of support they need, or like their ability to brick it. So how do
Sure.
you sort of approach that?
Yeah, this is a really deliberate choice from the start that, well, for one, the DIY edition and the pre-built, they all plug into the same ecosystem of parts. So actually exactly the same device. Really the difference is just how configurable it is on day one. Where
Mm.
pre-built, it's like any other laptop, you take it out of the box, you press the power button the day you get it, and you boot into your OS and you're ready to go. And for DIY edition, it's actually more of a kit. So you can bring your own storage, you can bring your own memory, you can choose a wider set of input and bezel color options, and you choose your OS, of course. And so on the day you open it up, you have a box of modules, you put it together, and then you choose your OS, you install it, and you get going. And this was really a choice that we made right from the start, that we want to make sure that we're building products that are both as deep as you want to go with them, but also as accessible as you need them to be based on your own personal background and interests. So we wanted to build these products that, day to day, they look and feel like any other laptop. But if you want to go deep and get inside and tinker, you have that freedom. But if that's not something you're comfortable with, we don't want to be inaccessible for you.
And what kinds of so there's the repairability and usability, and I guess breakability. You've also got thinness. These, like you were mentioning, they look like a regular laptop, and they're also quite small and lightweight seeming. They don't, like, normally we think of modularity as building in a bunch of extra space, especially with these modules that are swappable that fit into specific sized bays and stuff. So are there any trade-offs that you've had to make in order to enable this added modularity, uh, and at the same time have something that's consumer sized?
Yeah, this was an interesting one. This is actually something that we kind of uncovered right from the start, is that as soon, like literally, 2019, before we even really formed up Framework as a real company, when I would describe this idea that we're going to build these repairable, upgradable products, the default assumption was, well, it's going to be as thick as a phone book and it's going to look crazy and it's going to be heavy and it's going to be fragile. And so right from the outset, the clear lesson was that we better not make it a trade-off to make something repairable, not like a real meaningful end user trade-off to make it repairable. And so right from the outset, we set actually a hard requirement internally that as we were designing our first product, we were going to make sure that it was the same size and the same weight as the products that people would otherwise be buying. And so
Wow.
we actually chose the MacBook Pro 13 back in the end of 2019, early 2020 as our actual target of we want to hit the thickness and we want to hit the weight of the 13-inch MacBook Pro, because then we can point to that and say, well, Apple thinks this is a reasonable size and weight for a laptop, even though their products are totally glued together and soldered down. We've built a repairable, upgradable product that's the same size and weight, and we went and did that.
How does it work? So, uh, when we look at this image, we see a bunch of different certification logos, and I'm wondering like how that factors into this whole design.
Oh yeah, this is
Like,
an interesting and exciting one. How do you do certifications for a highly modular product?
mm,
And so the key is actually a lot of these modules we have to certify individually. So I can actually open this up, open up
ooh,
our laptop. We have, of course, like high resolution images of this online, but you can see that, of course, the battery has its own set of certs. The main board, actually, we do FCC and CE certs on this. And then some of the modules, like the expansion cards, for example, that you can plug in and swap out those ports. All of these are actually independently certified devices. And so you can, of course, use these not even with Framework Laptop. You can also use them with other stuff. We've actually seen some third-party products start to use them, which is pretty exciting. But then not everything. Like some of these modules are actually just certified within the laptop itself with the expectation that they're not really going to be used in any other scenario.
mm, legit. And you've got a bunch of them listed on the website here. Basically, if you go to the product pages and scroll down, you'll find these different modules: Ethernet, micro SD, extra storage, USB-C. Which is funny because it's almost like, is that just a pass through
It
of,
is just pass-through. Yeah, it's purely passive.
great. And HDMI, stuff like that, all kinds of different bays. And do you have different numbers of expansion ports depending on the size of laptop that you get?
Yeah, so the 13, the Framework Laptop 13, which is what we've been shipping for the last couple of years now, that has 4 expansion card bays, 2 on each side. And
Oh,
then the Framework Laptop 16, which is a product that we just announced earlier this year that we're shipping later this year, this has 6. It's got 3 on each side.
oh, I have so many questions for you. I gotta stop myself before I go too fast. But so we've got a couple of extra things I would love to highlight. These amazing swappable bezels. How easy do you think it is for someone to create their own bezels that would be compatible with this? Say they have like a 3D printer at home. I
Yeah, this
realize.
is a tricky one, just from a thickness perspective, and also some of
Mm.
the complexity around the privacy switches at the top. It is something that's
Ah.
actually pretty difficult to fabricate this thing. I'll take this off. You can see the backside of it, but there's some actually very detailed mechanical structure on the back. So ribs, magnets, or rather steel plates to match the magnets that are on the A cover side, and then a lot of detailed mechanical structure to make those privacy switches work. So this one,
Uh,
unfortunately, even though it's like a pretty low cost, simple object, the tooling is actually quite substantial to be able to make something like this. Like this is not an easy piece to be able to injection mold. A lot of the other stuff like expansion cards, this is like very, very easy to go and design your own in 3D print. We've seen like literally dozens of different designs that people have in progress. And obviously, because they're so tiny, it's super cheap to get get them 3D printed if you don't have a home 3D printer. So this is like using a HP MJF process, and it's I think it was like if you get like 10 of these, they're like a few bucks a piece for the enclosure if you don't have a home 3D printer.
wow, that's so cool. Before we dig in further, I also just want to highlight a few of your input modules. So at least on the 16-inch, you have the option to swap in a numpad or an RGB macro pad. Or this almost reminds me of like modular synthesizers, where obviously it's modular, and so sometimes you're going to have spaces that may be empty, and you can stick spacers in there. You can probably pretty easily fabricate your own little spacers to put in there and have your own, custom PCB designs or whatever that would go in there. Ah!
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. We also started opening up a developer program around the input modules. We have these little adapter boards, just USB-C adapter boards to connect to like the pads that we have here to enable people to start building their own modules ahead of us shipping this. And some of the submissions that we've gotten are just totally wild. Like there's someone building literally like a musical keyboard that slots in to replace the main keyboard, which is just like pretty cool to see.
Wow. And you've got this community section on your website that where you've got community support and then things for the different specific laptops. But then, yeah, this whole creators and developers section
Right.
where people can go and dive in really deeply into that. Now, I'm curious, on the modularity standpoint, we've seen some modular electronics before, notably Project Ara
Yes.
from Google. Yeah, I'm just curious, what kinds of lessons did you take from what they did?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I get asked this regularly.
I
Actually,
imagine.
less so these days now that we're actually shipping our product for the last couple of years. People can kind of see what we're building. But at the outset, similarly, it was like, well, it's going to be as thick as a phone book. And then didn't Google try this and didn't it not work out? And that was another clear object lesson of like, well, we better pick the right priorities. The problem
Yeah.
with yeah, and it's a really interesting case study. Motorola Ara, Google Ara, and I've chatted with a bunch of people who have worked on that, who had worked on that program in the past as well. And the main challenge is that the product they had was conceptually very interesting. Like it looks really compelling and engaging. It's this like super interesting little slab, and you flip it over on the back, and it's all these like Lego block style modules. And they designed this like very intricate and complex interface scheme that had like had magnets. I think it had like memory wire or something like that. It had some or like switchable magnets or something like that. That was crazy. And then it had this very interesting interface scheme in terms of like the actual protocols they were using that were quite custom. And in the end, they ended up with this device that was conceptually very interesting, but practically it was very expensive. It was very fragile. It was thick. Took a lot of explaining. Like if you looked at it next to something like an iPhone or Samsung Galaxy or something like that, these like very simple, clean slates, it took a lot of explanation for like, well, like what is this thing? Why does it look like
Mm.
that? Why does it behave like that? And in the end, of course, they never shipped it beyond some early pilot programs. And I think actually the ultimate reason was actually reliability issues that they were having that caused them to look at it and say like, well, if we attempt to actually fix the reliability issues, we're going to have to reset this entire program and start over again.
Wow.
And I think they decided, well, we're just going to can this thing because it doesn't seem like it's going to make sense. And so the lesson for us was, let's make it look and feel and behave like the other computers, in our case, that people would be buying, but then still within those constraints, make it as modular and repairable and upgradable as possible. And so for one, I kind of gave the example of the thickness and the weight for a MacBook Pro, but also just things like reliability specs. So we test our products, like the Framework Laptop 13, we test this to the same specs that like HP or Dell would test their commercial notebooks to, which is actually a higher standard than they would normally test their consumer notebooks to. So things
Oh,
like a Dell
wow.
Latitude or like an HP like G series. Like so for things like drop testing or things like having a weight that's like rubbed on the screen and making sure there's no screen damage or vibration or shock testing. All of that we test to commercial notebook standards.
Awesome. So it's interesting to me that people bring that up as an example of like, well, didn't they fail and stuff? Because that's the whole sort of trajectory of technology, of course, is that like, some things are going to pave the way for other ones, and you sort of learn from what came before you and stuff.
For sure, yeah. We're glad. Thank you, Motorola Ara team, for giving it a try. We definitely learned a lot from you.
Legit. We have an anonymous user who says they've been watching Framework with interest over the last year. Such a great project. And that they think it may be their first Linux computer. And you mentioned on your site that and you mentioned a moment ago that there's multiple operating systems that you
Oh
can
yeah,
use. You don't have to use Linux even. You can pick
that's
Windows. You
right.
can go with all kinds of different ones.
Yeah, and we have a very healthy mix of operating system preferences, probably a pretty even mix actually between Windows users and Linux users. And then, of course, within Linux, there's all these different distros, and there's actually no one single distro that has like a majority market share. We're actually seeing like pretty broad usage across all the major distros.
This concept of officially supported versus compatible community supported ones goes very much in hand with the hardware model that you're doing, where it's like, we have these versions that we support, and these ones are sort of like, if you go your own way, you're kind of, you're depending on um the community. But also, I imagine that you seem like a very engaged and excited team from what I've
Sure, yeah.
seen. So how do you make that balance work? Because, for example, you're
Right.
constantly sharing cool stuff that people have done uh, with your laptop. I love this SDR expansion card for the laptop. That's so cool. But yeah, how do you balance sort of the concept of supporting your community without being sort of
Right.
on the hook for?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We embrace this idea of like fractal complexity, basically, which is like on the surface, it's this very simple thing. But if you go down a layer, like you can see deeper complexity if you choose to. And then if you want to go down another layer, you can see even deeper complexity. So like at that top surface layer, you can look at framework laptop, pre-built, ships with Windows, hit the power button, you're in it, and that's it. You're using it like any other laptop, except 3 years later when you need a new battery, you don't have to buy a whole new laptop. You can just buy a battery and watch the YouTube video and swap out the
Yeah.
battery. But if you want to go a layer deeper than that, you can go into DIY edition and bring Ubuntu LTS, because that's your favorite distro, and bring your own memory and storage and put it together. And now you get that IKEA effect of like, I built this thing, this is mine, I get to play with it. Or you can go level deeper than that, which is you go and pick free BSD or something, or some other distro that's like even more niche, and put that on there because that's your thing. Or you can go level deeper than that and build your own expansion card modules because you want a CAN bus adapter to hack on your cars or something like that. And you can go
Yes.
a level deeper than that, which is like we've seen people take out the modules, and I think you pointed out a video actually on Hackster of somebody built their own cyber deck that reuses framework laptop mainboard. There's just like you can go as deep as you want. And this is like one
Mhm.
of the core things about framework, is that we want to make it as simple and accessible and obvious as possible at that top layer, but let people go as deep as they want to go. Whereas I think if you look at really most other major consumer electronics brands that are building these pretty complex advanced projects, or products rather, you kind of only have that top layer. You stop right at that surface of, well, you can buy it and use it the way we want you to buy it and use it. And if you want to go deeper than that, you voided your warranty, and we don't care at all about anything you're doing. That's not interesting to us.
Yeah, I finally found the right place to scrub to in this video. It's so cool looking.
Yeah, that thing is wild. That is such an incredible project that Ben made.
You're doing such a great job of celebrating just everyone who really dives in with this. I'm curious, it seems like a great tool for students and people who want to like learn about building. Are you seeing a lot of interest from the education community?
We are, yeah. We're seeing a lot of university students, college students pick up framework laptops, especially folks going into science and engineering. There's this is a just a bizarre anecdote, but there was like someone in a high altitude like stratospheric balloon club or something that was using a framework laptop, and someone posted on Reddit this picture of like this totally flattened framework laptop on a road, and it had like a sticker of like high altitude balloon society on it. So they're like, oh my god, did this fall from the sky? Can we repair this thing? I don't know. We tried to get access to like figure out who it was, but actually it turned out that it didn't fall out of a balloon, 10,000 feet and get pancaked. It actually like fell off of a car and got run over, which is equally bad, I guess. But we were hoping to get that laptop back and try to fix it because maybe it would be repairable.
It brings new meaning to the phrase road testing. That's
Yeah.
that's one heck of a. You've got a great GitHub organization on here where you share a bunch of stuff, including, for example, where people can go to find the specs for the expansion cards and electrical and mechanical specs, and how to dig in with those. Is there a favorite that you've seen so far? I know we showed the SDR one a moment ago, which I just think is brilliant. And you mentioned people doing like a CAN bus one maybe someday. There's this cute LED one. Any other favorites that you've seen?
Yeah, there's a couple of teams that are building LTE expansion cards, which is pretty cool
Oh,
because that's like pretty substantial. It's a complex project, but they've gone and started building them, which was just really, really interesting to see. There's also just some like goofy ones. Like someone on our team in Framework actually built like a expansion card where if you press the eject button, it'll shoot the card out. It was kind of fun. That was Ross on our team. There's some really interesting mainboard reuse projects. Like that Cyberdeck was super cool. We've seen a handheld, like a gaming, like a Steam Deck style gaming handheld. Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, that was really, really impressive to see because it just looks super polished,
It
and it's
really
actually,
does.
yeah, it looks actually like quite functional and useful as an actual product beyond just being like a cool thing to tinker with. We've also seen some small companies build some pretty impressive stuff. There's a company called Orbit Research that's building a Braille laptop that reuses a Framework laptop mainboard. That was one of the coolest projects I've ever seen, like in any category, like let alone stuff that reuses framework modules.
Oh man, this makes me want to build like I don't have the skills for this right now, but are you familiar with the stenography community? Basically
Oh
corded
yeah,
keyboards
corded
that
keyboards, sure,
y
yeah.
totally.
Yeah, you could totally build an input module for a Framework Laptop 16
Oh my
with a corded
gosh.
keyboard. That would be
Okay,
cool.
I gotta relax and come back to that later.
Yeah, you should do
Also
it.
yeah, plus you can plug these modules into pretty much anything with a
Yeah.
USB-C, port. Obviously, this one is a joke. People
Yeah,
don't expect this
probably.
to do anything. You can't probably I don't know, maybe you can put a BMI
Maybe a
out of a
future,
flipper zero.
yeah, maybe a future Flipper 1 maybe will have HDMI.
And then you added an audio jack to this. Does this actually work? Can you put
That
an audio
actually
jack?
works
Oh
incredibly
my god!
enough. Yeah, we tried actually all of the expansion cards that we've made. I think all of them actually do work on iPhone 15 with USB-C. Of course, all of them also work on Android phones that have had USB-C for many years.
That's incredible. You've got some really cool videos and stuff. I'm gonna stop telling you about what you have in a
Sure.
minute, but just for people who aren't familiar, there's some really cool videos that you have up here about how to design stuff, and on it's probably better to show it on Twitter where you can actually expand it. But yeah, lots of really cool stuff with demos and explainer videos and stuff on your social media. So really amazing community engagement that we're seeing from you guys. Just
Yeah, Halo
that's
Monitor
what we do
team
so
makes
well.
some awesome videos. And really, it's just like a super interesting, engaging product in a way that most consumer electronics. There's not a lot you can do on video, right? It's like, well, I powered on my laptop, and now what? But you can take it apart and modify it and tinker with it. It's actually quite fun to show.
Yes. So speaking of that, I'd love to chat about this blog post, which
Yeah.
again is sort of, the title is very like attention grabby. And what do you mean by this?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. We've seen across consumer electronics a lot of pretty heavy greenwashing, including from Apple with their most recent WWDC announcements around sustainability and that big
Mm,
produced video that they had. And they actually, I think Tim Cook actually had a reaction video following that to explain why it wasn't greenwashing. That kind of just went further into why maybe it was greenwashing. It's basically this idea that like the focus is on stuff like let's use recycled materials, which is great, which we also do, or let's buy carbon offsets, which is maybe questionable, and we have to kind of do more research into the effectiveness of carbon offsets. But like
mm,
fundamentally, the simplest and most effective thing we can do to actually reduce the environmental impact of consumer electronics is make our products last longer, which is totally obvious. Like if you can make your products last longer, you don't have to manufacture as many new ones, which means every part of that impact chain from resource extraction through energy consumption for silicon fabrication through energy consumption for transport through end of life and materials re-entering the environment potentially with environmental or human toxicity, all of that stuff reduces if you can make your devices last longer. And so our
mm,
focus, and we think that the best lever in consumer electronics broadly is making products last longer. And so we made that "We Are Not Sustainable" page. It was really a reaction to the messaging that we're seeing everywhere else. And so our message is that we know we're not sustainable. Like we are still producing new devices. We're still shipping devices. We're still consuming materials that are limited across the environment. We are still, at some point having to end of life some modules here that can't get reused into, handhelds and cyberdecks. But as we think about what we're doing, we're really being very honest and open and transparent about the things that we believe in and that we're prioritizing, which is that repairability and longevity, and also the places where we know we can still do better, which as an industry, we all do need to do.
Yeah, it reminds me of this iFixit
Yeah.
article, which of course they're a repair guides website. To put it simply, they also sell tons of tools for repair and stuff. But I've always been struck by this phrase that the greenest phone is the one that's already in
Yeah,
your
it's great.
pocket.
Yeah, and there are other companies that are also embracing this. Like Fairphone does a great job of really being
Mm,
transparent about like the reality of where they are. And it's also something that interestingly we see in apparel a lot. It's something that it's been totally absent in consumer electronics. Barring these very specific examples like iFixit or Fairphone. But as you look at apparel brands, actually that exact phrase of "we are not sustainable" that came like either directly or as inspiration from an apparel brand. But if you
mm,
look at Patagonia's sustainability page or some other apparel brands, like you'll see this like very interesting dichotomy of there are those apparel brands that have these pages where if you like really read through the page, like you can look at it and think like, well, are they really doing anything here? Or is this just greenwashing and kind of trying to build a story to try to sell a product? And then you look at other apparel pages and they've kind of gone, a generation beyond of trying to really understand their impact and communicate the reality of like, well, we're not sustainable, neither is anyone else, but here are the things that we're doing to try to at least minimize our impact and minimize our harm.
mm. And speaking of, I feel like they're not exactly analogous, but it feels like the concept of responsible technology integrates both environmental concerns and privacy concerns. And you have
Yep.
demonstrated a commitment to both of these, which I think is amazing. You were mentioning earlier how the bezel has these integrated privacy switches, and there's some info about that uh, on your community from 2021, I realize,
Right.
but you dive in a little bit to you got these amazing close-ups of sort of what's going on underneath there. Could you tell us a little bit about the privacy features?
Yeah, definitely. So we have done a few things at hardware and firmware level. One is those privacy switches that you're seeing there. So you can flip the microphone or camera privacy switches, and it actually is a hardware cutoff, not a software or firmware cutoff. It actually electrically cuts off the signal or the
Wow.
power to those sensors. So that's we just want to basically make sure that we're not relying on anything that's happening at the OS level, that it really is in your entire control to shut off access to the sensors. And then beyond that, really, it's just a matter of enabling you to choose your own software. So, if you want to bring your own privacy focused Linux distro, you can totally do that. And that is your choice. You don't have to pay for a Windows license that you're never going to use.
Or you could put Kali on it, which is sort of like digging
Yeah.
into other people's privacy.
Sure.
Or, for other uses.
Right.
Um, I'd love to hear a bit about your history because I was looking at your LinkedIn, and there's so much cool stuff. Okay, so first up, one laptop per child. I'm curious about how you feel that may. Do you feel like you came into that with already a strong concept of what you want technology to be for, or do you feel like that shaped your conception of the types of technology you wanted to build, or both?
Sure. Yeah. So I participated one laptop per child through Google Summer of Code, which is a program that Google runs to enable college students to go and work on open source projects for a summer. And so I wrote some camera software, some camera libraries, basically for the little webcam that was built into the EXO laptop. And I went into one laptop per child with kind of wide-eyed, naive optimism about the future of computing and technology and education and things like that. And it was this wasn't, I think probably to some extent still is, this incredibly interesting combination of people working on this project, of educators, people with like kind of very avant-garde beliefs around how education can and should work, and a bunch of open source advocates and tinkerers, and some folks on the hardware side that were really into building this like pretty unique, novel, low cost computer. um, and in the end, I think there were a lot of reasons that parts of it worked really well and parts of it didn't work at all. And I think there was like
Mm,
fundamentally this tension between these people who were maybe ec- optimists was is I think the good way of putting it, but extremely
mm,
optimistic about this idea of building a world that relies on open source software and building an entirely top to bottom open stack. And another set of people are trying to build this totally novel, unique approach to education. But then as you enter these countries across the world who are looking at trying to actually just build better educational curriculum and infrastructure for the schools and their students, I think there was fundamentally tension there between these different priorities of like, one group of people wants to like revolutionize education, another group of people wants to revolutionize software and computing, but the actual like departments of education and the school districts and the teachers and probably the parents to some extent just wanted to have good quality education for their children. And I think fundamentally that like the three parts of it didn't quite converge in the end. That like the things that it turned out probably would have been better would have been just using some off the shelf software that was
right.
less novel and unique, but maybe more directly plugged into existing educational content, even if you have to like hold your nose at the closed source nature of some of it. So like it was maybe like a little bit of like mismatch of like pragmatism and idealism not working out. And maybe that was one of the things that I did take away from that entire experience and watching it over the course of the decade that it played out, to bring into framework, which is like we have to really be thoughtful about where we're idealistic and where we're pragmatic, and for the most part prioritize the pragmatic over the idealistic. And if you look at
Mm,
framework like broadly, like it might look like we're doing this incredibly idealistic thing, like we're building these repairable upgradable products, we're trying to enable openness and transparency and modularity and all this stuff. But like if you look at like the actual approach of the products, like how we're building them, who we're trying to reach with them, how we're selling them, how we're supporting them, how we're enabling these communities, we try to really really take a pragmatic approach to it.
yeah, that enabling part, it really ties in with your decisions in terms of the design, obviously, where it's like, well, you can have all the positive features in the world, but if people aren't going to use it because they have to invest in a whole new system, in a whole new way of functioning with a computer, all that stuff, then even if it's totally modular, you're not gonna be able to get there. And do
Right.
you feel like it's enabled your ability to get into the market and get people who otherwise wouldn't be interested in a modular laptop?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even simple things like having that pre-built version that ships with Windows, like, even if like I think maybe, Windows is not the greatest operating system, even though I am actually using it right now. Pragmatically, the vast majority of the world on computers uses Windows, so we better build a, best-in-class Windows laptop if we're going to actually change the course of the computing industry, of the laptop industry specifically. And the same goes for everything else of like, yeah, we better make it the same size and we better use the same kinds of materials people expect. Um, and even things like, well, there are choices that we could have made that would enable, maybe enable us to go deeper on repairability or go deeper on open source firmware, for example, than we've been able to do, but in ways that would mean that we're, a year behind on being able to launch a CPU platform. And
Mm.
instead, it's like, well, let's actually make sure we're competitive in market. Otherwise, people are just going to go buy that Dell or HP or Lenovo that has the latest and greatest instead.
Yeah, and again with that whole the greenest one being the one already in your pocket. If someone has like a daily driver laptop and then they have this one as kind of like a toy or a hobby, then it kind of defeats the
Right.
purpose of
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. That is a really deliberate direction from our part as well. Is that we don't want this to be your tinkering toy. We want this to be your primary computer, and not be something that's additive. Be something that is a substitute.
It's like with 3D printers, at least in the past, the whole cliche of like if you get a 3D printer, then your project is the 3D printer.
Right. I've been there. Yeah. I've maybe let's see. I think 2010. I built my first 3D printer, and it was actually I didn't wasn't necessarily the case. I wanted a 3D printer. It was like, well, I wanted the things I could do with a 3D printer, but I spent like 2 years tinkering on the printer before I could get to the
Yeah.
project.
Ooh, okay, so did you say 2010?
Yeah. This is
Wow,
a
what were
yeah
you was that
rep
like a
wrap.
MakerBot? Oh,
Or,
wow,
no,
yeah.
rep wrap Mendel. Yeah,
Oh my
bought some
god.
parts off of someone on I think it must have been either eBay or off of like some community forum, and then picked up all the threaded rod and stuff from like the local hardware store. Spent a year tinkering it and tuning it in, and finally got it to print. And like the first print is this the blobby little shot glass that's like barely
Yeah.
holding together.
Oh, I got one of these
Yeah,
secondhand ones that was, it was
yeah, that's
already looked like this, and then also I think it was broken in some way, and I just had no hope of doing anything with it. Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
that's almost exactly the configuration I had, except that doesn't have a hotbed on it. I ended up building my own hotbed,
nice.
and it was another one where it's like I got a bunch of like surplus super high power resistors, or like these like real like resistors that are the size of like size of like this, like giant resistors. And then instead of doing a AC to DC power supply, because I thought like, well, I'm going to make it more efficient. I don't want to burn all this power with a power adapter.
Mm.
I just hooked it straight up to AC power. So it's just like, this crazy looking printer like you saw in that picture with this aluminum plate with these giant resistors that are plugged straight into AC power. So it's just like this monstrous, like fire hazard kind of thing. But
Yeah,
it was a fun project.
today I have a oh my gosh, a Creality printer, and I just bought a kit to make it do time lapses. So, I
Oh
know that you
yeah.
can build your own time lapse stuff, but like now I can just get a kit from the company that makes a 3D printer that does like enables the time lapses, and I gotta like hook it up to my phone in some way. But the fact that I even can do that is ridiculous. Uh,
Yeah, it's wild. The stuff that stuff that just works out of the box now, where it used to be like, well, you're going to spend a few months building your own version. Like time lapse actually was similar. Like I hooked up like I wrote some firmware for the controller on the 3D printer, and like hooked up a manual trigger to my camera to be able to do time lapses. And it took like a couple of weeks of tinkering to get it to really work well. But yeah, you can just like
yes.
download an app now and like, hey, it works, which is great. Like I love the accessibility of it.
Yeah, people would like hook up physical like limit switches for a
Yeah.
while that you could tack onto whatever, and this just like is part of the whole ecosystem. It's so crazy. Have you ever been to one of these like the we always hear about the rep rap festivals and stuff? Do you stay in touch with the rep rap community
I have
at all, or what are you rocking these days?
Yeah, I've never been to the festival. I've been to a few of the maker fairs where early on, like there was a bunch of 3D printing, because 3D printing was a
Mm.
thing that was just so inaccessible. You had to build your own printer. Now, of course, like it's awesome that you can just buy a printer, take it out of the box, and press a button, and it'll print. So now I have a Prusa. I think I have a Mark III right now. But it was similar. It was like surprisingly, took it out of the box, do the minor assembly to put it together, and then the first print straight off of the SD card that comes with it just prints perfectly,
Mm.
which was it was shocking, a revelation.
Yeah. Uh, what was I just gonna ask? It went out of my brain. Oh no, actually, I was gonna say I've been a little aggro about this whole drop your questions in the chat thing. We love having interaction from people who are watching. So anyone who's joining live, feel free to add your questions. If you're watching this after the fact, I'm sorry you're out of luck unless you've got a time machine. But be
We'll
sure
build
to
that
join us.
next. Repairable time machine.
Yeah. So one thing that often one gets into conversations about when talking about repairability and sustainability and things like that is the role of the individual versus the broader structures. For example, I do a lot of solar panel stuff, sort of tinkering on my own, and I've definitely gotten feedback that it's like actually if you're if you want to get technical about it, like you're being less sustainable by getting all these solar panels and trying to like mess with stuff and build stuff. And I don't want to be too absolutist about it because tinkering is the way that you learn how to do the real thing. But I'm curious about whether frameworks philosophy is being extended into any kind of legislative efforts or anything like that. Do you get involved in right to repair, for example, or anything else?
We we chat with I spend time chatting with like Louis Rossman, and with like Kyle Waynes at iFixit. We don't directly do any like lobbying effort from Framework. Like to the extent that we can like lend our voice and try to help champion different initiatives, we go and do that. Obviously, we're members of Repair.org as well.
Hmm.
Um, But it's just generally like our focus is less on let's go and spend the time and energy into the legislation because we know there are great organizations like USPIRG and Repair.org that are working on that. For us, it's really about like let's actually change the industry from the inside by building better products.
Yes. I love this concept of like, everyone doing their part, like depending on what your specialty is, what your interest is. We do need people who are actively making it easier through legislation. We also need people who are making it easier for people to make good choices. Like it's just straight up easier to do the supposed right thing if you have more options to do that.
Right.
Love it.
Definitely.
Oh, let's see. Let's do some quick questions. Actually, you know what? I'd love to ask you about what you did after you were briefly at one laptop per child through that program, but after that you did some incredible stuff. Head of hardware at Oculus VR. You actually started that team, is that right?
Yeah, so I was the first hardware engineer in the team, and then ended up growing it to about 80 people over the course of a few years. We got
Oh.
acquired by Facebook during that, so we were literally 2 years into Oculus, and we became part of this giant organization, which was I think shocking to a lot of people. We burned a lot of credibility and goodwill, but ultimately, fundamentally, and I've chatted with a bunch of the folks from early Oculus. I think everyone is still in agreement that that was the right move, that we would have never been able to get VR to the scale that it's at today if we hadn't have done that. We would have gone down maybe the magic leap route uh, of
Woo.
crashing and burning a little bit, unfortunately.
Hey. So having grown that team from you to 80 people, and now you're a founder and you're growing your own team again, I'm curious what kinds of advice you have for people who are trying to scale up from, either within a larger company or.
Do we have another like 3 hours? I don't know how
Hey!
much time we have for this. Wow, yeah, that's a big question.
That's true. That's a
Yeah, I
good question.
definitely learned a lot of hard lessons in Oculus about being a manager and growing and enabling people. Obviously, I'm still learning every day. I mean, you never stop learning. Um, yeah, but is there any like distilled canned advice that's going to be helpful to people?
Say they're making their first hire. How about that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, actually, well, there's a few aspects to this. One I'll say is that there's this idea in startups, this pretty famous saying. I don't remember exactly who the first one to coin it was, but it's this idea of doing things that don't scale. So as you're, if you're a founder and you're starting something, like it's okay to like be manual and hands-on for an extended period of time. And when it reaches a point where it's like, well, this like I literally cannot do this anymore, or like I don't know how to do this anymore, go and find a person who's better at it than you are, and
Mm.
get that person in your team and enable them to go and be incredible at the thing that they're incredible at. And so like if I think about both that course of time in Oculus from myself to like 80 people, and now Framework we're about 45 people today. Every one of those next people to bring in was like, let me find someone who is better and smarter at this thing than I am, and like kind of knowing at least enough about the area by like having done that slice of what the thing was doing, or that person was doing rather, before they joined. So like doing marketing hands on and like writing content and posting on social and doing that, even though like it didn't quite scale for me as the founder to be doing that, and then finding like an awesome incredible marketing lead to bring in and take that over. And then for her, Marissa, who's on the team now, like for her similarly, like doing a bunch of stuff hands on as the one marketing person, and then figuring out like, okay, who's the person we need to bring in who's better at this than I am to go and own and drive it. And the
Mm.
key is that like sometimes these will be like really senior people who you bring in who have like been doing a thing for for years or decades, and it's like, yeah, this person's a total slam dunk. I know exactly what they're capable of. I'm going to bring them in and they're going to just knock it out of the park. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's someone who's like a few years into the career, but like in speaking with them, you can see the hunger and the passion they have to keep growing and learning, and that ends up being the right person to bring into a team. And then like figuring out how to mentor and unlock that person's skills is really always really amazing to see.
Ooh, you just said growing and learning, and that set off one of the things that I've heard from a couple of different founders, notably Nate Seidel of Spark Fun, who made this decision at some point after being a founder and being the CEO, there's this issue of balance between doing what you love in a very hands-on sense and the sort of hacking versus admin time when you're leading a company as well. Do you have any issues striking that balance? Do you have ways that you manage it?
That's an interesting one. It's actually both in Oculus and now in Framework. It's as a founder, like ultimately this everything rolls downhill to you at some level. Like the buck has to stop at you. There is no one else the buck is going to stop at. So like you have to go do like going and figuring out some like obscure legal thing that like no one else in the team has expertise at, and you just have to go and do the painful and hard work to like figure it out. But like the way you stay sane, like one is you could just be totally dead inside, which is an option. I think a lot of founders head down that path, just suppress all your emotions until there's nothing left. That's one option. And then the other option, which I think is probably better, is to make sure that you still have some hands-on thing that you get to tinker with day to day. And so for me, it's like sometimes like I will just start building little projects that are directly in line with our mission, just to be able to still have something that's fun. So like some of the modules or cards or things that are up on GitHub or things that like I opened up, KiCad, or I opened up OpenSCAD and just started messing around and playing with something as a way to like kind of, unlock being able to do something that's more mentally fulfilling at some level, but also something that's, useful to the community.
Nice. Yeah, the fact that you're not only building a whole computer, but also all these expansion cards definitely seems to give you a lot of freedom to just build one little thing and like have that be like a whole little thing. Seems satisfying. Um, oh yeah. Speaking of the team, a moment ago, people may be interested to know that you are hiring.
We
So if
are, yeah, we've
people
got a handful of roles open. We actually almost always have a small number of roles open, but it's also like as we, continue to expand the number of products that we're working on, we'll have more hardware roles open as well, which may be more relevant to folks listening.
splendid. I have one other comparison question. We've had Bunny Huang on here talking about the
Yeah,
Novena laptop or Novena. I can never figure out which way it goes. But yeah, I'm sure that this also invites a lot of comparisons, being a sort of very adaptable, modular, hackable, and privacy-focused laptop. I'm curious what you see as some maybe because they've been out for like they got funded in 2014. So I'm guessing that there may be some things that you took from their experience as well from looking at what they did.
yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't remember if I have a Novena. I have a couple of other projects that Bunny put up on like Crowd Supply or other places. But yeah, it
They got
is
some
interesting.
pretty
I've always
things.
What's that?
They got some really pretty things like
Oh yeah,
the
they got some cool projects for sure.
precursor. Oh, ho, 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 ho.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I've been tracking the stuff that he's been working on for a very long time, and definitely have drawn some inspiration from that. It is, of course, it is quite different. Like the mission that he and or that Bunny and the team have versus like the stuff that we're doing in Framework. And it is a quite opinionated and I think actually important approach. The precursor project and Novena and some of these other projects, which is like let's go to the extreme of openness and transparency and open source and um, security through transparency to a large extent, also especially with precursor. Uh, and actually prove that it's even possible. Because like if you look at a lot of these projects like Novena 2014 or some of these other projects that are even older or what precursor is today, it's all stuff that I think you could look at surface level and say like I didn't think this was even possible. Like I didn't think it was possible to build
Mm.
effectively a smartphone to some extent with precursor in a way that can actually be like totally open from a security standpoint. And so I think what Bunny is doing with actually taking that approach of like proving that it's even possible to reverse the entire trend of electronics broadly is important, because then others can look at it, whether that's us or other brands can look at it and say like, well, maybe there are aspects of this that actually are important, and now it's proved that it's actually possible to do this, so can we actually go and take some aspect of that and bring it into another product?
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, precursor also super gorgeous. Yeah. And of course the Novena, sort of being the anti-Apple has very much not gone down the road of um of making it look like a normal consumer laptop, which, you
Right.
know, who even knows if that was possible at the time? Just there's so much advancement that's gone on, like, in 9 years. Just incredible. So we have a question
Oh
from
yeah.
Kyle who says, "Will there be a 3D printable case for the 3 Framework 16, like you have for the 13?"
Yeah, so this is something that we would like to do. We think, of course, being able to reuse the high value modules outside of the laptop itself, being able to extend that life beyond the life of the laptop even, or especially if someone's upgrading their main board from one generation to another, we want to make sure that that old main board still has a path to be reused. And so we do plan to have 3D printable cases. It's a little bit tougher for this one just because the actual size of this thing ends up being larger than most home 3D printers, which is
Ah,
just going to make
yes.
it. Yeah, even technically the for the Framework Laptop 13, we had to do like a multi-part case just to make it work for most home 3D printers. For this one, it's going to be like a multi-part case of some kind, or maybe we'll come up with some other fabrication method that has sheets or something along with 3D printed parts. But basically, we do want to come up with ways to enable reuse. We also, of course, want to enable other companies to be able to build cases. So Cooler Master, that's like a one of the bigger PC case makers that's out there, actually made like a purchasable case out of plastic for the Framework Laptop 13, and that's something that we hope to see again for the 16.
Cool. Pulling that up and it's being a little bit slow. Here we go. Framework and Cooler Master. Super cool. So we're coming to the close of the interview, which means a couple of lightning round questions and the big one, which I'm asking everyone. What do you see? What are you keeping your eye on as a new development in either modular computing or any of your areas of interest, especially relating to framework, that you think is going to really level things up, that you're really excited about, that's going to change the future?
Yeah, I think probably like a lot of other people are watching, we're watching, or I'm personally watching, like what is going on with AI,
Hmm.
which is like a lame answer because it's like, oh, AI, it's like the cool new business trend where all the startups are focusing on AI because it's the thing to focus on. But I'm actually like almost looking at it from like a different angle, which is like the are we about to head down like a really dark path with AI when it comes to devices specifically? Like if we think about what would if we think about what would like Apple or Google or Amazon or Microsoft like to do with AI on devices, like what is that going to become? Are there alternative worlds where like we have AI devices where people have control over the models and they have control over the interfaces and they have
Mm.
observability of like what's actually happening, or they're buying machines, or they're buying phones, they're buying laptops that have baked in, you've got to use this AI model through this service because that's what us Microsoft or us Apple, what we want you to use, and you don't have observability of what's happening under the hood.
Mm.
And so I'm very curious what happens there. And there's like, I don't know, there's like a lot of stuff that I do broadly in my life has like kind of gone back to specific science fiction novels. So like a lot of
Yes.
a lot of the projects I work on, like kind of, oh yeah, there we go. I was actually going to bring exactly that up. And so like when I think about AI and I think about like framework, I think about like, well, for Neil Stephenson's book, Diamond Age, subtitled "The Young Lady's Illustrated Primer," I think about like, well, what is that world? Like, is that a world where it's some closed model from Microsoft or Apple or someone else? And that's like the interface that children are interacting with, and they maybe even coming back to this one laptop per child thing. Is that like the educational interface? It's this closed black box model where you put in inputs and you get out educational feedback and guidance and training, or is there some world where it's like, well, we've got these open modular long lasting products and you can plug in whatever OS you want, you can plug in whatever AI model you want, and it's all observable and it's all open and it's all transparent, it's all traceable, and like that's the world that we head down. And like as I think about that and I like look out like 10 or 20 years in the future, it's really hard to see see the open side of it winning. I hope it wins, and I want to do everything I can to make it win. um, but there's just so much money and energy on the side of like let's black box it and make sure
Yep.
that those ones win.
Mm. I feel that very much. Well, I would love to dig into some lightning rounds. Unfortunately, we have a hard cutoff today, so I'm going to have to end it there. But I would love at some point to have you on again. Maybe if you
Sure.
have another update someday, and we can dig into more of the good stuff. We've got some really good comments. Y'all, you're killing me. You jumped in
Right
right
at
at
the
the
end.
last 5 minutes, and you got these amazing questions. So maybe we'll get to those another time, or maybe we'll put them on social media. We'll figure out a way to try and get those questions answered. But you can also check out all these links that we've got in the description. Oh, I pulled this up because I actually was meaning to build something like that for Pi Day this year, but then I
Oh,
didn't end up doing it. Or,
nice.
partially doing it. You know how time
Yeah,
goes.
build it.
But yeah, go to frame.work for more about the laptop. They've got a community. We've got Framework on LinkedIn. There's GitHub with all this good stuff, including like expansion modules, how to do your own. Also, Twitter/X. Nirav has his own ones of those, of course. And yeah, check out all those links. We're going to be adding any extra ones in the description to the video. Just scroll down and click on them. And thank you so much for joining us. What a pleasure. This is such a cool project, and I love being able to dive into it with you a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here.
Cheers. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.